Hi friends, host Eric here, host of Talking with Fans People, and this is my co-host and beloved girlfriend Rachel Lapalosa. And today we're going to be presenting another Octavio Silva production, namely discussing the TI-FE axis in a way that is more accessible to those who are less familiarized with the jargon.
Okay, let's start with FE. How would you like to introduce the function?
Well, it stands for Extroverted Feeling, and it refers to a person's perceptions of how other people are impacted emotionally and even intellectually by a given behavior. So it's the manner in which people know how to socialize gracefully or don't, and socialize awkwardly.
So would you say that's the main thing that FE does?
It manages that range of stuff, awkwardness to gracefulness, and also hierarchies and stuff, knowing who's in charge and who's an underling by body language and things like that. That's an FE consideration.
What does FE look like in the first slot?
In the dominant slot, it's very focused on everybody, but themselves. They ignore their own feelings and focus almost entirely on how other people are made to feel by various choices. So an FE Dom is going to want to include everybody in an activity. If they see somebody on the sidelines, they're going to go out of their way to say, "Do you want to come and be included?" And they also are types that don't handle being alone very well. So if an FE Dom is alone in his house, he's not very likely to sit there and watch TV by himself. He's more likely to get onto some sort of socializing activity like a live stream or something like that.
What are the two types that have FE in the first?
So that would be the ESFJ and ENFJ. And the difference is each FE Dom has a different knowing function as their second function. The ENFJ is an intuitive knowing FE Dom, and the ESFJ is a experientially knowing FE Dom.
What activities or jobs engage FE?
Well, I think for ESFJ, great jobs are school teacher up through about 4th grade. My ex-wife, ESFJ, for example, was a preschool teacher and then a preschool director. Those are good jobs. They do like managing people. They're good at managing people. Human resources, admin, that kind of thing. Those are good jobs. And also potentially actor or actress. For both FE Dom types, be they ENFJ or ESFJ, it's probably likely that a higher percentage of ENFJs get into acting than a percentage of ESFJs,
Yes.
but there's probably an equivalent amount of both of them in the fields.
How can FE be identified in others' actions?
So one thing that an FE type is likely to do is to offer, FE Dom anyway, is likely to do is to offer a fair amount of praise. You're not going to get a lot of criticism from an FE Dom. If it is criticism, it's going to be constructive, reluctantly given, and couched in lots of softening language around it. So in general, if you see somebody who's giving a lot of compliments out to people and noting what's good about the people that they encounter, that's likely to be an FE Dom, because it's a way to make sure that everybody's feeling good and therefore likes you as well.
Now that we've discussed a lot about what it looks like in FE Doms, what does FE look like in the 7th slot?
So an FE polar person is somebody who doesn't understand the mechanics of gracefulness to awkwardness. And so they tend to manifest in a couple of different ways. Because there are either ISTJs or INTJs. INTJs are most famously robotic in their talking style. They seem to express themselves with not a lot of emotion. It's not because they don't have a lot of emotion. It's because they're blind to how expressiveness of emotionality impacts an audience.
Any personal anecdotes of seeing FE in action?
I mean, the thing is, it happens all the time on the YouTube channel. So people come into the chat, and depending on what they're saying, often the reason something's being said is because, for example, somebody wants to put me in my place or something. Somebody wants to state a statement that positions themselves as the expert and me as somebody learning from them because they're so smart, right? That would be an FE, well, and I guess you'd say an adversarially FE motivated comment. On the other hand, some people come in and start off by saying, "Hey Eric, long time viewer, first time commenter. I really love your stuff. I think you really are the smartest voice in typology. Now for my question." Well, obviously, you're preparing the questioner to be favorable to answering your question as opposed to somebody else's who might be in line or whatever, metaphysical line. I don't go first come first serve, so there's no line. And it's trying to establish that, don't worry, I'm an ally. Extroverted feeling is, because it's dealing with other people, it's necessarily an interface function. You've got to both listen. You can both sort of listen to FE data, that is to say, read someone's body language, and then know what they likely are feeling accordingly. I was having a conversation with the mother of my client on the phone, and Rachel was telling me how it kind of is somewhat stressful for her because she picks up on the stress that the mom's feeling. But for me, because the mom's not upset at me, it doesn't impact me at all. So I've got third slot FE, and it wouldn't be this bad, but sometimes that can play out as, because it also means I've got blind spot in my own feelings, but it can play out as, oh, my mother just died. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. So anyway, do you want to go to the liquor store with me? I'm going to go get some cigarettes right now.
Yeah.
Just basically not caring about how others feel if it doesn't link to you is third slot extroverted feeling.
All right, so let's go to the other side of the axis and talk about TI.
Well, it's introverted thinking, and it's commonly referred to by Jung as a subjective judging function, and it's commonly thought of as subjective logic, but that's actually an incorrect understanding of it. So introverted thinking is the logic of language, logic of communication. So an introverted thinker is somebody who thinks something is correct if the words they're saying about it are defensible to other people by explaining it logically.
What does TI mainly do?
Well, mainly it checks to make sure that FE isn't wrong. For an FE DOM or an FE tool function, mostly it checks to make sure that FE isn't wrong. So FE is a heuristic. Will say, if I'm trying to determine whether a given position on something, an explanation is correct or not, I will look to everybody else's response to it. Well, there's broad consensus that the world is not flat, therefore the world's not flat. The TI says broad consensus is sometimes wrong, so it will parse out the actual words to make sure if they make good logical sense. One example of this is on the topic of evolution. Most smart people, quote unquote, accept evolution without looking into it or parsing it out at all, because there's so many other smart people who think it's the correct explanation, so they don't really feel like they need to understand exactly why or if it's the correct explanation themselves. So TI would say, well, I'm not going to accept that default commonality. I want to see for myself. I'm going to try to figure it out by looking at all the words that people say about it and seeing if those words make sense. TI DOMs are ISTPs or INTPs, and the TI is always going to, the reason there are two of them is because the TI gets paired with one of the two action functions. So it's either extroverted sensing or extroverted intuition that gets paired with introverted thinking. Because it's a deliberation function, you figure out logically what you're going to say or what your moves are or what's correct in this sort of off by yourself thing. Then when you come back, you're fully prepared to act, either in terms of what you're going to say or what you're going to do, because you've decided in this way of deciding that assumes things aren't going to change while you're deciding.
And just to be clear, that makes them have TI in the first slot, correct?
Yeah, so as a dominant function, then they're going to be, I guess you'd say, deliberate. They're going to want to make sure that they've thought through the thing before they take action. Okay,
so let's see, what does TI look like when it's in the 7th slot?
So TI polar is going to be either an ESFP or an ENFP. And what it looks like in the 7th slot is somebody who doesn't value logical consistency very much, and who doesn't think that words matter. So an ESFP is likely to say, "Talk is cheap. You can't box me with your labels. They'll focus on one inconsistency while ignoring other glaring inconsistencies with their position."
Could one phrase be actions speak louder than words?
Actions speak louder than words is consistent with a counter-valued TI perspective for sure. But basically, the message from TI polar people is you're just trying to label people and put them into boxes. Reality is more complicated than that. You're using black and white thinking. It doesn't mean anything because, okay, well, I know I said that, but I didn't mean that. These are all things that TI polar people say. And, ESFPs, I think, are a little bit more aggressively wrong than ENFPs, but they are both pretty aggressively wrong.
Okay, so what activities or jobs engage TI?
So if you wanted to look at an ISTP and an INTP, and I've taught conditional logic before, and I'm teaching it to an ISTP right now. In fact, she's just as fast, exactly no weaker at all at learning conditional logic. She's a 5th grade girl. She's an ISTP. She's picking it up like that. Everything just is so natural to her. The same thing would happen if I were with an INTP. Now, the reason I start with that to answer the job question is because an INTP is a very good choice for a lawyer, because the INTP additionally has not only the parsing ability, but the generative ability as well. So they can generate a lot of logical arguments, not just determine correctly which arguments are logical or not. The ISTP is very good at making correct determinations about logical questions in front of them when they have all of the things, but they're not going to generate a lot of logical arguments themselves. So lawyer is a good career for an INTP if they can motivate to do it. Debate coach is a good career for an INTP, but for an ISTP, they're much more likely to end up in a field that's more TE oriented, such as being a doctor, because they're smart enough to learn all the stuff and understand everything, and they have enough follow through to actually complete the thing, and they've got NI in the 3rd slot, so that means they've got a singular path that they're comfortable being like, I'm going to finish this thing,
Yeah. I had an uncle actually he was the stereotypical craftsman. He was a carpenter for all of his life until he retired, and he still does pieces of work for like national parks.
And my client's ISTP dad, he's a viola player, I think, in the viola or violin player in the LA Philharmonic. So you can think of ISTPs as if they were allowed to live 900 years, they'd end up as Yoda. They spend all their time polishing this one broad discipline that's more than just a closed set thing, but that they become the ultimate master of it. If they had 900 years to work on this thing, they'd be the ultimate Jedi.
All right, so how can TI be identified in others' actions?
You can look for other people to correct themselves a lot on things that don't matter. So last Wednesday I went to, actually, you know what? I said last Wednesday, I meant Tuesday. It was Tuesday, actually, now that I think about it. Like, who cares, right? But TI people are going to correct themselves a lot like that. TI people are more likely to be convinced by a correct argument than by an incorrect argument. So one way to test it is to basically see if they respond differently when you disagree and have good cause than when you disagree and don't have good cause. TI people are valuing fairness. If they're going to complain about something, they're going to complain that something's unfair rather than say that somebody's feelings weren't accounted for. And they're also likely to be quite opinionated, or they're very confident in their own conclusions, and they don't put a lot of credence in other people's divergent opinions. So in that regard, it's subjective in that they trust themselves much more than they trust other people to make determinations. But it's objective because, unlike the other kind of judgment function, introverted feeling, Introverted thinking can be checked by other people. You can say, well, here's my reasoning, and everybody can check it and look at it, and they can all agree that it's good or bad, or what's wrong with it, or what's right about it, or whether it's invalid or something like that. But you can't do that with introverted feeling. Introverted feelers will tend to think that's just language being kind of imperialistic and imposing on the authentic moisture of humanity, this black and white thinking. But TI DOMs are likely to think that that moisture is largely responsible for all of society's ills.
So that's a nice segue into any personal anecdotes of seeing this function in action.
Which just happened in the car with me and Rachel on the way back to get cigarettes. We were talking. We actually waited in the line at Popeyes for a really long time, and then we got to the talking box part, and they basically said we don't have any food, and then we had to.
Yeah.
I said, okay, well, if that's all you have, because they're like, well, we can get you like 3 pieces of spicy chicken if you take 2 pieces of regular. It's like, okay, you know what? You don't have anything, you guys. But anyway, while we were waiting in that line, Rachel and I were talking about benefactor-beneficiary relationships in socioeconomics, and I was trying to figure out who the ENFJ's beneficiary is. And I got confused in my head. Rachel looked it up on the phone, and she said it was ESFP. So the thing is, when we got out of line, she said, okay, so yeah, it's ESFP anyway, blah, 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 blah. But even though we had just talked about it, she just looked it up, and I knew she had just confirmed it was ESFP. I still had to go through and think it out in my head and went, okay, well, let me double check this. Is something that TI DOMs will say all the time about everybody else's opinion about everything. They don't trust anybody's logic. They need to check it for themselves. So, if there's something that needs parsing out, and you tell them, actually 1,422 plus meow meow plus meow meow this is the result. And that would be it. This is an exaggerated example, but because in that instance, probably everyone would just accept it. But TI DOMs are the most likely to go, well, let me check your work myself because I don't trust you to think.
All right, so TIFE access. How do these two functions work together?
So the thing is, if we go back to FE, it's a social grace versus socially awkward thing. And it's as a heuristic, the majority rules, basically. Whatever the majority, if there's broad consensus about a given issue, I don't need to think it out myself because people smarter than me have already thought it out, and I can just rely on them. But I'm not going to rely on a particular person because every particular person might have their own bias, so I'm going to go with the majority and the consensus on the matter. And generally, that's a pretty reliable heuristic. However, the reason it's on the same axis is what does it need to check its excesses? It needs TI to check its excesses. In other words, well, what if somebody's just trying to get by on that? If somebody's just trying to get by on successfully making friends, basically, and getting people to say, yeah, that guy's a great guy, or that guy's important, or whatever, then that guy's ideas haven't been properly vetted. So TI over FE says, let's vet the ideas ourselves. FE over TI says, let's use the heuristic to allow us so we don't have to vet these ideas ourselves, and they constrain each other. So for me, I'm very logical, but I'm also aware of the fact that saying, here's a bunch of angrily delivered logical reasons why you and your precious beliefs are all wrong and horrible and stupid is not a good way to make friends and influence people. So FE says, hey, Eric, maybe you should consider their feelings too. It constrains my TI in that regard. For an FE above TI person, it's the other way around.
So that actually brings me to our next question, which is how do people who use this axis differ from FITE users?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a big question, and I'm sure we'll explore it on the FITE axis video at more length, but the bottom line is TEFI axis is one that knows what it wants and how to attain those goals, or knows what the problem is and then how to solve it. The FI is the knowing part in that sense. They're deciding, really. FI decides what it wants, or decides what's important to it, or decides what's a problem, and then TE attains the thing it wants or solves the problem. It figures out how to do that. It's ordinal. So it's, in other words, it's a The TEFI axis is one of self-interest, and the TIFE axis is one of what you'd call communitarian interest, I guess, or fairness over costs and benefits. It's deontology over utilitarianism. It's principles, rules that are universal over how can I get the outcome regardless of the rules.
Any other points you'd like to make about this axis?
People often misunderstand introverted feeling versus extroverted feeling because they think that their understanding how other people are made to feel about something makes them empathetic. And in some sense that's correct. It's like they're empathetic in the sense that they are kind of compelled to absorb some of the other person's emotions, but that doesn't make them what empathetic is often referred to as. In some way, I'm more empathetic than people with higher FE because it's easier to get me to take emotional ownership of other people's emotions. Whereas, FE tool is instrumental only. So we use how people's perceptions are influenced by their emotional response to things in order to shape reality rather than as a goal in and of itself.
All right, so I think that we pretty much covered everything for the FETI axis. We're going to be doing a series covering all 4 function axes.
And this is one of 4, so there's 3 more to go if you aren't good at subtraction.
Yes.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.